So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Senate Education. It is Friday, April 2nd at 1:25. We are going to start the day by talking with Tom Cheney, the Executive Director of Advanced Vermont. He's going to come in and share some words about the kind of work that they do. We're then going to have an update from and some draft legislation from Mike O'Grady, Ledge Counsel, and David Englander on lead, radon, and PCBs in school. We'll then, as those of you who have been following the floor discussions, we will be taking up a proposal on S100 around financing. I've then asked the Agency of Education to give us an update on standardized testing this year, and then we're going to, in the era of COVID, and then we'll hear from Jeff Fannin. I've asked him to talk to us a little bit about the potential teacher shortage that the state is maybe facing. So we might go a little bit out of order depending on witness availability, but let's start with Tom. Great to see you.
Great to see you as well.
And I apologize for how long it's taken us to have you into committee. Senators should know Tom has worked hard to get in here, and I think we've been just a little busier than expected. So I apologize for you jumping off our radar, but glad you're back on it. The floor is yours, and we have about 30 minutes.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you. Jeannie, is it possible for you to allow me to share my screen?
Tom, do we have your documents? We tend to work just with iPads, if that's okay.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So yeah, I will just walk through it this way then, and I will do my best to be able to see you while I do it as well, but that may be easier said than done. So let me just get it here in front of me. So for starters, for the record, I'm Tom Cheney, the Executive Director of Advanced Vermont, and thank you for having me in today, and no worries for coming in a little bit later in the session. It's just a pleasure to be here. So the goals of the discussion today are to go over the state attainment goal in the state and the work that Advanced Vermont does. Talk through some considerations for workforce policy, give you a little introduction to two big projects we're working on that I think are very relevant to this committee and to its work. Policy, go over some policy priorities and our appropriations requests.
Tom, just so you know, I don't, there's only one returning member to this committee, so I don't know if anybody knows anything about Advanced Vermont either. So great.
So that's coming right up. So I will give you the deep introduction, and also I'm not sure I've been in front of this committee, perhaps at all since I've been with Advanced Vermont. We've been to your neighbors to the General and Economic Development Committee, but I'm not sure that I've made it to this one. I was hopeful to last year, but things changed. So I want to start really by stating that for the benefit, particularly those that are new to the committee, to your point, that Vermont is one of approximately 45 states that has set a post-secondary attainment goal. And it's very simply that 70% of working age Vermonters will hold a credential of value by 2025. So it was initially set by a group of leaders from education, business, government, nonprofits, philanthropy, and it was adopted formally by the legislature in 2019. And it serves as a really important stake in the ground to inform the development of policy and appropriations priorities in the legislature, but also really helps unite those sectors I just mentioned towards a shared vision to achieving this goal. And really today, in the midst of a global pandemic, to me, I think, and to many people working in this space, the goal just couldn't feel more urgent. And please do interrupt me, and I actually cannot see you, so just jump right in. So just to ground us a little bit further, what is a credential of value? Through my testimony, when I say credential, it'll really mean more of an umbrella term to encompass the many forms of education and training that result in a piece of paper. So certificate, degree, industry recognized credential, occupational license, registered apprenticeship. And it's a means of verifying skills and competencies and has value in the labor market, and it's stackable and transferable. And the Act 80 actually created a subcommittee of the State Workforce Development Board that I sit on that is working to formally define what a credential of value is for Vermont. But those are the general features. And the great thing about it is that it doesn't just prioritize one form of education or training over another. And we're not saying degree and non-degree with kind of a negative descriptor there. We're talking about credential of value, something that really is inclusive. So with the legislation that passed the state attainment goal, it identified 4 key policy priorities that the state should focus on in order to meet the state attainment goal. And so one is promote the awareness of career pathways and the value of education and training after high school, expand access, of course, increase completion, and then maximize partnerships across and within sectors to achieve our state workforce and education goals. So Advance Vermont is really working to drive progress towards the goal. And that's why we were created. So we're a statewide organization. We're driving action among business, education, government, nonprofit, philanthropy, with a focus on increasing educational attainment. And we really try to think about it as not just an education issue, but as an issue vital to the strength of our individuals, our economy, and our communities. And really, it's not just about increasing that attainment data point, but about increasing equity and really strengthening those connections between education and training and employment. So a little more housekeeping. VSAC is our fiscal agent and provides our operational support. It also has been a seed funder of our effort. And as has long been the plan, it is phasing out its investment this year, but will continue to provide the backbone support and be a core partner. So we have a growing list of engaged organizations. We work with various capacities with many different partners, and this is an incomplete list, but really gives you a sense of the range of organizations we collaborate with. So not exhaustive, but I think gives a flavor of the variety of different groups we work with in really in different ways. So probably I'm going to do this first. So our work, we focus on changing the narrative. So building awareness of the importance of education and training after high school, and really the diversity of those pathways that we have. Advocate, so you're looking at it right now, both on the policy side and then on the programming or institutional side as well. Just make sure that all the core stakeholders understand that they have a role in increasing attainment in the state, and often policy change, whether it's institutional policy or state or local or federal policy, makes a big difference. We bring people together through our convening work, whether it's through conferences, information sharing, et cetera, but really trying to drive everybody in the same direction. And finally, we measure. So we track progress towards the goal. We identify where equity-related gaps exist, and we share state and national data and research that we have done ourselves. We have a data dashboard that does kind of go over the, I think it's 26 or 27 key indicators of post-secondary attainment in the state. And it really was built for you, for legislators and other key organizational leaders to have a really good understanding and a foundation in what are those levers that we have to pull to increase attainment in the state. So how are we doing with attainment? We're at 52.6% in 2019, which is the latest data available. And that puts us about 60,000 Vermonters short of our 70 by 2025 goal. So, we've made progress over the years, but we're just not on track to make up the difference without intervention and investment between now and 2025 and really beyond. And nationally, we are just above the national average of 51.9% attainment. We generally have more bachelor's and graduate degrees and fewer short-term credentials. And short-term credentials, as we'll talk about more, really are where a lot of the attention and interest from prospective students is trending at the moment. And so there's some opportunity segments we have that we could help kind of make up that 60,000 gap pretty quickly. Obviously, you get right to 60,000 if you had all working age Vermonters who had some college experience finish with some sort of credential program. But there are also other opportunities, particularly, with our high school graduating class. There's about, it's a little less than half. It's about 40% that don't actually continue on to education and training after high school. We have a 47,000 or so Vermonters who are 18 to 24. They may be enrolled right now in a program, but haven't finished. So key is getting them across the finish line, and those enrolled who haven't been. So want to talk through some key policy considerations, and this is where there gets to be some stats. And so I'll kind of go through them quickly, knowing we don't have a tremendous amount of time. But first, the economy really depends on a skilled workforce. Even before the pandemic, demand for a skilled workforce outpaced the talent available. All the high pay, high demand jobs in the state require education and training after high school. 2 in 3 employers say they have a hard time hiring for positions. And then if the Great Recession's any indication, and experts think it will be, the jobs created following the pandemic will likely go to those with education and training after high school. And so you see here in this stat that 99% of those jobs created after the Great Recession went to that group of people. So communities depend on a skilled workforce. Individuals, families, and communities that thrive with increased education and training. And educational attainment, of course, is one of the most effective ways to address racial, gender, and economic inequities. So identifying and eliminating those systemic barriers to equitable education and training it's really a moral and economic imperative. So demand is high and barriers are higher. Vermonters see the value in education and training after high school. Almost 90% in that stat there say that they think it's valuable. And 63% of those say they actually would like to pursue a credential after high school. Yet they struggle to justify the cost. The value number goes down significantly when you start to ask, is it worth the cost? It's about 34%. So during the pandemic, a third of Americans whose job has been impacted believe that they need more education and training in order to find a comparable job. So there's a real demand right now and a real understanding that they may need more education and training after high school. So we have to meet that demand. We have to be there both as a government and as institutions to be ready to fill that need. But less than half say they actually have access to that training. So that's really where we all come in. So, as I noted a moment ago, inequities underlie the barriers to education and training for Vermonters, and affordability is really chief among them. So, without financial aid, it would take nearly all of a family's income to send one person to college. And then those who are first in the family to pursue education and training after high school often struggle to complete. Same with low-income students and boys in particular, with that stat of 16% of Vermont's class 2012, first-generation boys obtained a degree within 4 years. There are inequities among people of color, and of course, broadband's a huge issue, and obviously more important than ever. So students struggle and juggle, I should say, they struggle and juggle responsibilities like never before. And so we really believe as an organization that if we better understand who our students are, we can better craft policy to serve them. So we actually conducted a poll in fall of 2019, so before the pandemic, to get a sense of what our student population looks like. Spoiler, it's not students who are full-time college students spending a lot of time on the quad. They're older, they work, they're parents, and they access education in different and new ways. So we found that even prior to COVID, they're really juggling work and financial and family responsibilities like we've never seen before. So these stats are pretty powerful.
Champion?
Yeah, Senator.
Tom, this is all post-secondary, or what when you say students, what do you mean in this?
Yes. It's people who are pursuing post-secondary credentials, whether it's a degree or a certificate or anything like that. So we looked back in order to get a statistically significant sample. We had to look back a few years. So with people who've been enrolled at some point, some had completed, some hadn't, and that was how we kind of got that demographic look. Yeah. Yeah, great question. Thanks for making me clarify there.
And,
Senator Hooker.
thank you. And Tom, how do the career technical centers connect or intersect with these as far as the credentials that are available coming out of those institutions?
Yeah, great question. So they very much are a key and central component to making sure that we increase attainment in the state. So I think it's probably every program in a CTE center, certainly almost every, offers some sort of credential, and often multiple credentials. So some of these credentials are like a CPR, certification. Others are, you can go and work on automobiles. So there's different levels, and the AOE works within Perkins law to actually have 2 tiers of credentials, a tier 1 and a tier 2. So tier 2 are probably those that most closely align with this attainment number. So a CPR certification, as an example, wouldn't count most likely, but which I think is maybe an obvious example. But something like a diesel mechanic certification probably would.
Okay, and as far as apprenticeships, are they counted towards the attainment goal?
Absolutely. Yep, 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Great questions. So I'm on the second slide. It's probably slide 18 or so. But this says, students juggle responsibilities like never before. And so 1 in 3 are hungry and struggling to find housing. Nearly half are first in their family to pursue a credential without the support of an experienced family member to help them navigate. More than half are stuck paying their own bill. And then large percentages of our student population are actually new Americans and veterans. We've got 13% are new Americans and about 10% are veterans. So the bottom line is we've got to meet students where they are. And so the other kind of key thing and policy consideration is that students are looking for career connections. The more and more that they see career connections, the more meaningful it is for them. And so you can see that in one of the slides here, or one of the graphs in the slide that I have, that they really report that if a student has received support from their institution to help them connect their education with their career, then they'll say it was worth the cost. A pretty powerful stat. And then, what students are looking for in their credentials, that they're looking for those that are relevant to work, they're accessible and streamlined, they have a strong value for the cost, and are stackable. So that means that there are clear credential pathways, perhaps starting with a certificate and ending up with a degree. Stackability is something that is really important, and not just a buzzword. It is really something that's starting to become a reality for a lot of people. Vermonters need navigation help is another key policy consideration. So 9 in 10 Vermonters see the value of post-high school education training, like we said a few slides ago. But with so many resources to identify and evaluate and access, kind of all this relevant information that can help them in their career and education path, it's just costly, time confusing. So particularly those who are historically marginalized from those backgrounds, they have the most trouble really accessing these resources and the supports needed to get into education and training after high school and then ultimately to complete it. So a national survey indicates that less than a third of Americans say that they understand career pathways and potential education programs well. And as I mentioned before, they're really looking for short-term credentials. We've got 1 million unique credentials nationwide and about 2,000 in Vermont. Vermonters really need help navigating their options. So we also, in the survey that provided this other data that we just went over, we asked, do they see a need for resources to support them? Do Vermonters see a need for a resource to support them to pursue their education and career journeys? And 91% said that an online hub doing that would be valuable for them. So the next slide is, we answered the call. We have a new tool for students. It's called My Future VT. It's myfuturevt.org. And it's a free one-stop online resource providing Vermonters with the information they need to make informed and empowered decisions about their career and education paths. It's built for job seekers, prospective students, and then the navigators, those people who work with them. So the voc rehab counselor, the Vermont Department of Labor counselor, VSAC, school counselors, you name it. We built this resource for them as well, so they can use it with their students and those that they work with. So this is launching in April. It's live now in beta form. We still have some things we're adding to it. We're still user testing. It'll look a little flashier in about a month, but we're going to go live and do a big public relations campaign to try to get it in the hands of as many Vermonters as we possibly can. And we just think it's so essential that we have this resource out right now, given all the challenges we have with COVID and the workforce recovery that we're no doubt going to need to focus on. So that is a huge project that Advanced Vermont has undertaken. And if you go to the next slide, you can see a screenshot of the homepage. And really, we have three core components: exploring careers, finding education and training programs, and getting support. So we actually take the Vermont Department of Labor and McClure brochure that I think you've probably seen or heard from. I know you've heard from McClure. And we've put it online. So you can actually interactively explore the 66 high pay, high demand jobs in the state and get a sense of what those jobs look like. And then, and this is, I think, never been done, we've actually connected all of those jobs to the programs in the state that align with them. So we're still building out those programs, but we have contacted every post-secondary institution in the state and worked with many of them already and more to come to get their programs that align with the high pay, high demand jobs on our site. So you can click on a program that you really care about a career you care about or interested in, and then you see the programs in the state that help you get the education and training you need to access that job. As we go on, we're going to actually expand to include all the plan is to include all post-secondary education and training programs, regardless of whether they connect to the high pay, high demand careers or not, but that's where we've started. But it's a big undertaking. So then the third section, after kind of, having a database of careers, a database of education and training programs, and related information that support both of those topics, many other pages and resources from how do you, give me some advice about a job search, where are the jobs in Vermont? We have links to job boards. How do I write a cover letter or a resume? What are those things? To how do I pay for education and training after high school? What are the different types? Tell me what a credential is. I've never heard that word before. What is that? And what's the difference between a certificate and an apprenticeship or a degree, an associate degree or a bachelor's degree? So those are those two sections. The third section is getting support. So we know that an online resource is a great starting point, or maybe it's a supplement to some conversations people have had with a mentor or a school counselor. But we have to make sure we're connecting them to real life supports, whether it's a human being who can help them along, or whether it's a particular program, a support program that can help them. So we want to really make sure we're doing that. So we have a whole nother database of all of the resources that we have been able to inventory that will help job seekers and prospective students along their journeys. And we add to those every day. And we'll be continuing to add to those, I think, every day. And you can sort them by identity. So you say, I'm BIPOC, or I am LGBTQ, or I'm young, or I'm older, I'm a high school student, or I'm an adult, or I'm a parent. And so you can actually search through and get the resources that are relevant to you. Again, this hasn't, to our knowledge, been done anywhere before. So that's all on My Future VT. I have just a few more slides, but curious if there's any questions about that resource.
Question. First of all, great job. I think this is really interesting, very important, and appreciate your work on it. Senator Hooker.
I'm impressed with it as well, but my question is, what kind of system, IT type system do you have? Is this going to be connected with DOL that has, many issues with the IT? Are they going to be able to handle this? Is there a need to upgrade? I mean, we already know that there's a need to upgrade IT there, but is this going to be able to go live by the end of this month and not run into problems that we're seeing already with the IT system that exists?
Yeah, it's so great question. Two things. One, it's live now. We're just making it better before we really push it far and wide. So there's a few little things that we're working out, but you can access all of the information right now. And what we're doing is we're getting user feedback. So people who are our target user, key stakeholders, those navigators are telling us, this is where you nailed it. This is where you need a little finessing. And our developers are continuing to kind of put some bells and whistles on it. But it's ready. It's ready and live and 100% better than what we had because we didn't have this before. So we feel really confident about where it is now. So we're not anticipating any glitches there because, like I said, it's already pushed live. In terms of connecting it with VDOL, so there is this broader conversation that the Vermont Department of Labor is looking at, and I think they've had appropriations asked that I think was supported in the House, which you may be familiar with, that was around building out additional IT supports for their workforce development division. So I think it was case management, and then also, some reporting mechanisms for their federal reports and elsewhere, but also they wanted some public facing tools. And so we are and will continue to work with them to make sure that we are connected where possible and not duplicating efforts, and really staying coordinated. So their project's very much on the early phases. Ours is ready to rock and help Vermonters right now. So we're going to work very closely with them to make sure we integrate where it's necessary, and don't duplicate as they build theirs out and decide what's important for them to include and what their vendor can provide.
And
helpful?
prior to, yes, it is. And prior to your big opening, how's the traffic been?
Well, it's been pretty good. I don't have super relevant or like recent data for you, but we've had pretty good traffic of the folks that we put it in front of, and we had really good feedback and really good insights. So it's been well received. And ask me again in about a month and a half, and I'll have some firm numbers for you. Yeah.
Okay.
Senator Lyons.
So this is just awesome. I wish that you had been around when I was advising hundreds of students. But
I wish I was working with you then too.
yeah, it would have been fun. I know. So Tom, this is so awesome what you're doing. I'm totally impressed with it, and the work that you're doing with the Vermont Department of Labor. And are you? I have a lot of questions, and I'll try and keep it short. But are you working extended out into with the contractors? like Weber, and DOL sort of contracts out with different folks, and are you linking in with them as well, or or is that part of the future plans?
Well, I think both. The
Okay.
answer is we try, in terms of our resources in particular, our resource section wants to connect people to all of those entities. So Weber, Voc Rehab, all of these different entities.
Yeah.
The job centers, I believe they're called, out of VDOL. So that, as I say, what I would say is our key linkage point right now is making sure that we're connecting people to those tools and those resources. And we want to, continue to strengthen relationships with those organizations to find not just, are we directing people to the right place, but can we have some joint initiatives as well, to kind of further my future VT and this work more broadly.
So then my other question is this, it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, and it's kind of serendipitous. Here you are, that a number of these folks who might even work for VDOL, or they might work with a contractor or with DCF, and they're interested in continuing their education to master's level, let's say. And what we need more than anything right now are some masters in social work focusing on mental health. So they're all flowing together. And these folks are required to take continuing ed credits. So they may have a high school degree or they may have a bachelor's degree, but they're taking CEUs. And you're the link. It seems like you're a neat place to begin a dialogue with our state college system and especially in a time of Zoom, to put together some, I mean, I've done a lot of work in the experiential learning area and understand that these CEUs could definitely be used to demonstrate if it, their ability in
Yeah.
for a bachelor's degree or for a master's degree. So have you thought about the CEU bit at all? Because if you haven't, I'm going to put a bill in because I think this is so important for people who are maybe, I was talking with someone the other day actually who is doing the workforce development for high school kids and trying to move them into the workforce. And she takes CEUs and she wants to get a master's degree. So here she's helping kids. She's taking her little coursework, and wouldn't it be neat if that could help her get a step up too? So have you been thinking at all about that? I just see so many connections here. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and I think that it's a really important point. And what we want to be able to do with this resource is to eventually, kind of check all those boxes. Right now, we have a more narrow focus towards kind of more of that first credential that somebody might have. So we can, and kind of to try to advance this goal. But yeah, I mean, it's 100%. We need to be focused on all of the different training opportunities that we have. Thinking about how can you, get experience for your prior learning is really valuable. And what we hope is exactly what I think is happening right here, Senator Lyons, is that this tool isn't just a wonderful tool for students and job seekers, but it's also a tool to advance the conversation. So
yeah, you're right. You've done that. You've absolutely done that. You're doing you're doing great work.
And if I might, it might make sense really briefly, one of the, and this is in the slides as well, we launched, as we were saying, we want to inventory all of the credential programs in the state. We realize nobody's done that. The state hasn't done that. Nobody has done that, right? And so we said, well, how are we going to do this? And we plugged into a national effort that's helped us quite a bit. And really, the thought is that if we have all credential information, not just in Vermont, but across the country together in a readable, in a kind of like an open data format that all kind of speaks together, apples to apples, we can actually create really cool comparison tools. We can really create really great things, information resources for students and career seekers, but also, and this gets to your point, Senator Lyons, for policymakers, for employers, and for institutions. So with what we're doing just on our micro level in Vermont, when we have all of the post-secondary credentials inventoried in the state, we'll be able to tell you as a policymaker, here are the credentials that are offered in this area. So health, as an example, health services. And you can look at it and say, well, does that track the need? And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So there's a lot of questions that you can ask as a policymaker or answers that I think you can get from this data. And we're at a place where we've started the work and we need help to finish it.
Yeah, I can hear that. And obviously, many of our institutions of higher learning have done some equation between experiential learning and college credit. So it's not like there's going to have to be a reinvention of the wheel. It will be a matter of your getting them to help you catalog that and to put it into your system. Kind of great, neat.
Any other questions? We're going to have to probably leave it there, Tom, given that Ledge Council is back and forth and their time is tight and we have Mike O'Grady coming. But do you have a final word for us?
I'll leave the final word with an ask. So the work that we're doing with My Future VT, with this work to credential all the programs in the state, we call the Vermont Credential Transparency Project. Both are active, both are making great progress, both are helping Vermonters today. But to make them stronger and better, particularly in COVID, we're asking for a state appropriation of $350,000 for this year. So happy to talk with the committee or with any one of you more about that ask, but certainly be hopeful that to the degree that you're having any conversations or influence with the appropriations committee, that you will we'll talk about this as something that might be a
Yeah,
priority.
I
for
think
you.
we are working pretty closely with Approach. So if you would put that in writing, that would be great. Share it with our committee assistant, who'll share it with us, and then we will we'll have to have you back for maybe 15 or 20 minutes on that ask at some point. Great, thank
Perfect.
you.
It's I think my second to last slide in the deck, and I'm happy to pull something further together.
Terrific. Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, we are now moving on to look at lead, radon, and PCBs in schools. This is a topic that I know early on in the session was raised, and time and issues took over. I've spoken with Senator Lyons a little bit about this, who is, as you know, the chair of Health and Welfare. This has a lot of overlap with her committee. And so while we're looking at the school construction bill, H426, it seemed like a good time to get an update on those items from the Department of Health, and also have a look at some language that was shared by the administration as it relates to PCBs, just to get this conversation going a little bit. And that's why Mike O'Grady is here. I don't know if this is something that would end up being worked on in here or with Senator Lyons. I think we can talk about that, but that is the outline of what we're doing. Any questions before I have Mike O'Grady jump in? Okay, Mr. O'Grady.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Senator Campion, do you want me to walk through the language?
Did you already email it to Jeannie?
I don't believe I emailed it to you. I did not email it to Jeannie. I will email it to Jeannie now.
No, that's fine. Why don't you, we'll put it up on the screen if Jeannie would give you access to that, and we'll have you take us through the language and give us a little bit of an understanding of what it does.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yep.
So this is currently a draft bill. Generally, what it would do is require all schools constructed or renovated before 1980 to conduct screening of indoor air quality for PCBs, and that would need to be conducted, completed on or before August 1, 2026. And a school that did, in screening, detect actionable levels of PCBs would then need to consult with the state Vermont Department of Health regarding what would be the appropriate response. So that's generally what would happen. Let's go through the sections of the bill. Section 1, this is an amendment to the Environmental Contingency Fund. Environmental Contingency Fund is a special fund that has monies in it that are used for environmental emergencies, and the way that emergencies are generally characterized, it's as a release. And this amendment would add to the definition of release, effectively adding to what the monies in the Environmental Contingency Fund could be used for. And it would be for intentional or unintentional action or omission resulting in the spilling, leaking, emission, or disposal of PCBs from building materials in a building or structure. So if there was, as with Burlington High School, a determination that there was a spilling, leaking, emission, or disposal of PCBs from the building, the Environmental Contingency Fund could be used to provide monies to respond. Similarly, in Section 2, this is an amendment to the definition section for, well, it's the solid waste chapter, but the definition of release relates to hazardous materials releases. Hazardous materials releases are something that the state has significant authority to respond to and remediate, and then seek contribution or payment from the person who caused the release. So what this is doing, as with the Environmental Contingency Fund definition of release, is including the release of PCBs from building materials in a building or structure as a release that the state can respond to under its hazardous materials release authority. And then in section 3, this is session law. So this is not being put into statute. And this is going to basically say what the corrective action and procedures are going to be for screening of schools. And the first thing that's done in subsection A is provide that, except as otherwise provided, the investigation of PCBs under this section are going to be subject to DEC's investigation and remediation of contaminated properties rule. It's basically a rule that the state has for when to or how to screen for hazardous materials and how to respond to them when they are found. The second subsection, the screening level investigation, says on or before August 1, 2026, all schools, so it's all schools, it's not just public schools or school districts or independents, it's all schools that were constructed or renovated before 1980 shall conduct a screening level investigation of indoor air in their school districts, supervisory unions, and independent schools of school buildings for PCBs according to guidelines adopted by the Department of Environmental Conservation in consultation with the Department of Health. And then you'll see in sub C, a school that has a sampling result that is at or exceeds the 15 nanograms per cubic meter screening level shall conduct a site investigation in accordance with DEC's investigation and remediation of contaminated properties rule to determine whether the source of PCB contamination is where the source of PCB contamination is located. And then the site investigation report shall identify the location of the school, that is the source area, the use of the location, the number of students, and they're basically the length of time that they're present in the location where there is that source of PCBs. And that's important because based on the site investigation report, Department of Health shall provide the school with guidance on the potential health effects. And the guidance provided by the department shall be used to evaluate cleanup alternatives and be used by DEC to determine whether the school has met the requirements for site closure under that investigation and remediation rule, or whether or not that the site can still continue to be used subject to conditions on its operation. And then the PCBs in schools, there will be a guidance document to be used by DEC when overseeing the investigation and cleanup. In addition, in section 4, the administration is looking for 2 positions to implement and oversee the PCB screening of schools. One would be DEC and one would be at the Department of Health. And the entire act would take effect on passage. What you don't see here, I will note, is money. What this would cost, who would pay, what are the costs or of any, what state costs would be paid if there was a determination that PCBs were present. That's the big omission in this language from my perspective. There's no language addressing the cost to the state or to the school or to the town, etc. So that's the bill.
Okay. If you don't mind taking it off screen, and I think we'll take a few questions. Senator Lyons, please.
Okay. Oh, so yeah, knowing how costly this might be, the money is probably, we should probably look for some money, but the question I have is related to the ARPA funds. Everybody's going after ARPA funds and the potential for infrastructure funds or capital funds going forward. And so I'm asking Michael if you have any thoughts about whether or not there might be monies available for the work that's in the bill, or possibly for the school. I mean, we've been talking about school capital construction the other day, but if you have any sense of what might be in coming federal dollars, whether ARPA or next.
My knowledge of ARPA is really focused on the state recovery funds, which have 4 categories of approved use. And Vermont is receiving $1 billion, or just over $1,053,000,000 from that. 3 of the categories have to be in response in some way to COVID and the need to pay for things in response to COVID. And I wouldn't say that this is in response to COVID. The 4th category is to pay for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And there's no requirement for COVID response there. But I don't think this falls within water, sewer, or broadband. There's also money in ARPA for school construction and generally for something called infrastructure. I am not as versed on that and what it can be used for as others. I can talk to JFO about that if you would like.
Yeah, I mean, it might be helpful without, getting too far afield. But the other question is what potentially is coming with the infrastructure bill that continues to be debated. So,
Sure.
Because I'm trying to understand how we may be able to get 1 or 2 positions out of this, but that's an ongoing expenditure. But once all the testing and planning is done, it's a huge expense not that we don't want to do it. I'm not saying
Right. The House Appropriations Bill does have $5 million of money in it to do the testing. There's $10 million that's transferred to the Environmental Contingency Fund, and of that, $5 million is to be used for the PCB testing. But that's for testing. It doesn't say response. It doesn't say remediation. It doesn't say closure, because the bill recognizes that there might be closure. So I just wanted to put that in front of you as something you either address now or probably in a year or 2, since screening will be going on until 26.
Yeah, and my thoughts on this, and I think this might warrant a conversation with Senator Lyons and the pro tem, and just see if with the and Senator Kitchell, what the path forward might be, if and when we want to do it, and when it makes the most sense. I'll also request a fiscal note. If you want to, you don't need to write to joint fiscal if you don't want to, Mr. O'Grady. I can ask them about the ARPA funds as well.
Sure. Okay.
Fiscal note. Any other immediate questions for Mr. O'Grady? Senator Perchlik.
I guess it's a question for you, and maybe I missed this. Are you thinking of this as an amendment to 426? Or as different as like a committee bill? Or
yeah, no. To be honest, I don't know. What I'm afraid of is that there are, as I think a lot of chairs are, there's all this money out there. What sorts of things do we need? What can we access, and what do we need to be prepared to use? And so this is just something that I wanted to get out there today to all of you. I don't necessarily think it would. I don't think we'd have time to do it as an amendment, I don't think, to H26, 426. I think this is going to take a combination of, I think, and maybe Senator Lyons would disagree, but I think we need health and welfare involved in these kinds of conversations as well. And certainly appropriations. And there's reference to DCF, so that means bringing natural in possibly. So is that helpful, Senator Persley?
DEC.
Yes, thank you. What did I say?
DCF, but that brings us in, so.
All right, then, thanks, Mr. O'Grady. Let's leave it there. And I'll reach out to Joint Fiscal and we'll be back in touch. Mr. Englander, you just heard the introduction of an idea from Mr. O'Grady, but what we're really looking for is more of a broad overview, as we said in our request, on lead and radon and PCBs in schools in general. I guess you could categorize this as school health, if you will, the buildings themselves. And if you would just bring us up to generally where things are, your concerns, et cetera, I think that'd be really helpful to just sort of set the table as we were digging into some of this stuff.
Wonderful. So good afternoon, committee members, Mr. Chair. My name is David, for the record, my name is David Englander. I'm the Senior Policy and Legal Advisor to the Commissioner of Health, which is still a mouthful. Mr. Chair, I think in terms, there's a significant amount of uncertainty and unknowns in these things. So I'm going to start in reverse order. So I'm going to talk about PCBs, then radon, and then water testing for lead, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
So in terms of PCBs, PCBs are an incredibly stable molecule. They last a long time. They're resistant to heat, so they were used for industrial purposes in hundreds of products, thousands of products up until the late 70s. The exposure to PCBs is they're a carcinogen. They have non-cancer endpoints such as disruptions to the endocrine system, as well as impacts on the immune system. The issue is that they are pervasive in things like insulation and caulking in windows, which of course is used in all kinds of construction materials and therefore are affecting our schools. There is no requirement for indoor testing in Vermont, whether it be in domestic spaces, industrial spaces, commercial spaces, or education. When testing is done frequently in connection with renovations, sometimes we find things and sometimes we don't. As I might preface this by saying there's a significant amount of uncertainty about radon testing in Vermont because, PCBs. We have very, very little testing of indoor air quality for PCBs in general. And the remediation costs are even more uncertain. It might be as easy as switching out a window, and it might mean that a school needs to be, no longer used for educational purposes. One of the middle grounds, of course, is changing the regime of the HVAC system, which we'll come back to in radon. And then, of course, you can minimize exposure by only having personnel in that building or in that room for a limited period of time. We're sort of at the very beginning of trying to get our hands around PCBs in terms of exposure to air quality. I'd have to take your questions, although it may be the case I'll have to take your questions back to our folks to get you answers.
So on PCBs, I suspect that you were involved a little bit in the drafting of the administration's bill that we just went through.
Yes, although in consultation with us, absolutely, DEC was the primary drafter. This is something the department and DEC obviously support.
Okay. I don't see any immediate questions, so please continue.
So moving on to radon.
Senator Lyon.
I'm sorry.
I think I'll save my question for the end because it doesn't exactly relate to schools, so I'll hold that thought. That's a heads up for David Englander.
So in terms of radon, there's also uncertainty. We do have there are no requirements for indoor testing for radon in schools, but Vermont, I should start here. Radon is a radioactive gas that comes from the decay of granite. Vermont has very high levels of radon across the state. I think we have twice the number national average of households with elevated radon. Radon testing is not required. The Department of Health does maintain a radon testing program that is at no cost to the schools. We only have one person. I'm going to pretend as though I'm not looking at notes as I pull up a document. I can get you some numbers. I have not committed all this to memory. I beg your forgiveness. 101 schools have been tested for radon through the radon program, which is less than a quarter of all schools. And 12% of schools have had at least one room with elevated radon tests. 8 schools have installed mitigation systems. 3 have fixed their radon problem by making HVAC adjustments. And 1 school put mitigation on hold due to significant renovations that were coming. We can do between 15 and 20 tests a year. We actually have an industrial hygienist who comes in and actually does the testing. In contrast to lead testing, it's a little bit more technical collecting indoor air. There's many more factors, not just like filling up a jar and sealing it up and sending it out. The costs of radon testing are also extremely variable. It might be as easy as opening a window or changing the HVAC system regime. And it can be that you can't use the building, which is very unusual, but you might have an expensive system that essentially you create a chimney and you suck the radon out of the place of exposure and you put it outdoors. The cost for remediation can be anywhere from free, opening up a window, changing HVAC, to actual remediation system, which can run from, very rough numbers are, $10,000 to $100,000 for that sort of thing. And in fact, even in domestic spaces, it can be tens of thousands of dollars to make sure to ensure that you're taking the radon that's in your basement and you're putting it into outdoor air. Just as a point of fact, radon is present outdoors, but non-concentrations that would have health effects. It's really about the buildup of radon in a closed space and then inhaling it. We did not conduct, I should note, that we did not conduct any radon testing this year due to the department's full deployment to the COVID-19 response.
Thank you. Still not Senator Lyons.
Well, no, I was just going to say PCB does affect the immune system. So in that sense, it makes one more susceptible to the infection of COVID infection. So therefore, we could link it.
Great.
I probably would be turned down, but it seems to me that this would perhaps make our children and teachers more susceptible to infection. I don't know whether if that would pass muster at the federal level for the use of any funds. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Mr. Englander, lead.
So lead. There's been a lot of turnover in the committee, so I don't know how far back you want to go. I do have a memo that I'll send to the committee by the end of the day. I want it to be responsive to your questions, though. The Department of Health and DEC conducted a water testing for lead pilot program in 2017 to determine whether or not there was exposure to lead by virtue of students, staff, and teachers drinking lead, and there was a sufficient number of elevated lead in drinking water that the Department of Health joined with DEC and others to support the bill that became Act 66 of 2019, which requires that all schools and childcares across the state test every tap that is used for drinking water, food preparation, or ingestion to test for levels of lead. Money was appropriated for both getting a testing program off the ground as well as doing the testing itself. For the initial round of testing, the state decided to bear the cost. The General Assembly appropriated money for the Department of Health not only to have the staff do this, but also we actually did all the testing, all of the samples. So we did all of the outreach. Us, DEC, and AOE. we did all of the testing, the outreach, the training. We also arranged for the shipping and the pickup of samples, as well as the testing itself at the public health lab. All of the data is available at a marvelous website that was designed and maintained by the Department of Environmental Conservation. The program was going great guns and everything was going very smoothly up until COVID. Schools and child cares had until July 1 of this year to test, and our target was going to be well ahead of that. So in March of 2020, we had tested 65% of all schools. And again, I'm going to pretend like I'm not pulling up my notes.
So roughly 70% of the schools in the state have been tested.
And have results. And those results are publicly available on our website.
Okay. And then right now things are on pause given the pandemic. And so there hasn't been a date set to sort of pick up testing again.
So there is a date set.
Right.
So as of a few weeks ago, I'm sorry. So I failed to mention that the Department of Health, in conjunction with other stakeholders, came before the General Assembly last March and asked for an extension because not only were we fully deployed, not only were staff as well as the lab fully deployed to COVID, but of course, students and teachers and staff were no longer in schools, which meant testing was impossible because you have to test during the hours of regular operation.
Right.
So that was put off until December 31 of 2021. A few weeks ago, the Department of Health reached out to the remaining schools to determine whether they would be willing to continue testing, and we got responses thus far from 57 schools, and the dates for their testing have been scheduled, and I'll send you a link in my memorandum to that schedule. So that's all publicly available. So
what percentage of 35% is represented by the 57 schools?
Yes.
What percentage of?
Oh, I'm sorry. What percentage? So it's, you'll forgive me for a moment.
So I may not have been clear. So if we're looking at, roughly 35% of the schools still need to be tested, and you've got a date for 57. Any idea how many after that? Or what?
Sure. Sorry. So 61 schools remaining.
Okay. 61 schools remaining. Okay.
Oh.
All right. And then would you say a word or two about the cost for remediation with lead? Because now we have all these schools out there also that I suspect they're going to need funds.
Sure. So the cost for remediation can take several forms, and you'll forgive me, Mr. Chair, if I'm giving too much information, but you can take a faucet out of service, which might, the cost of which might be nothing. You can put up a sign saying, this is only for hand washing only. That's not considered remediation. You actually have to take something out of service meaningfully. Mm-hmm. To replacing a tap, which might cost $60 to the most expensive thing that has been done is taking several taps offline and installing water filtered bottle filling stations. So the lowest cost for any party, I believe, was $59.50. And the most expensive remediation was $24,000 from a large school that did a whole host of work. I'll just note for folks who are less familiar with this bill is that the remediation funds have been appropriated for essentially from the wall out. So it's really a replacement of tap faucet or drinking fountain, and that when there are costs associated with plumbing, which has been been less than 8% of schools have had to deal with. I'm sorry, I think it's 8 schools, and childcare had to deal with an actual plumbing problem. It's usually the cost. Usually the source of the lead has to do with the solder in the fixtures themselves. I should say, despite the fact that since 2012, it's federal law that all fixtures sold must be lead free. There are many of those fixtures still available, And lead-free also doesn't mean that there's no lead in them. Ironically, there are still, it just means that they have to have a very small amount. But if you are purchasing a fixture that, if you're purchasing a fixture that was sold after 2012, the fixture is very, very unlikely to be the source of the problem, and indeed hasn't been. So right now, Mr. Chair, to answer your specific question, $165,000 in remediation reimbursements have been processed. Let me correct myself. The minimum request was not $59.50, but $59.95. The maximum request was $24,000. It is estimated that 40 schools and 17 child cares have requested and received remediation reimbursement. This is a fraction of what could be reimbursed based on the reported remediation actions taken by schools. And honestly, we don't know if schools and child cares have decided to foot the bill, whether they don't have the organizational administrative capacity to request remediation, or whether they're waiting until such time as it makes sense for them, for budget or staff reasons.
Very helpful. Appreciate the overview very much. And committee questions at this point for Mr. Englander on PCBs, radon, lead. Anything else, Mr. Englander, that you believe we need to have our eye on as it relates to school health? Again, the health of the buildings. PCBs popped up. Lead. Anything else that you're thinking we may end up having to work on? I mean, asbestos, for example, is something.
Right.
So I don't know if there's anything else that you're thinking might be out there.
No, I mean, the good thing about asbestos, I probably shouldn't say the good thing about asbestos, considering it's a carcinogen, but if it's remaining in place, if it's undisturbed, if there isn't construction or remediation, it's not going to affect you. The same thing is actually true of lead paint as well. If the lead paint is in place, it's not peeling, it's not falling, you're not taking it, you're not handling it. It's safe in place. Although obviously we would like as much of it out of both, domestic residential as well as industrial and educational spaces. So to step back a little bit, certainly I shouldn't say certainly. It seems appropriate for us to have a larger discussion about how we're regulating some of these things. There are a lot of holes, as we've discussed, that there are. For instance, there is no indoor testing regime for indoor air testing for things like radon, and it's a very complicated. It's very complicated. It is that kind of testing, for instance, it takes a sophisticated actor to do it, and it can be expensive to do the testing, and of course, it can be expensive to do the remediation. So, in the months and years to come, we're going to be having a discussion about how thoughtful can we be about protecting students as well as the teachers and staff that work in schools.
Senator Lyons.
So I'm still going after how can we make a lot of this happen with limited resources, and as we're looking at the need for HVAC investments in schools as a result of the pandemic, and obviously there's been thought given to tag teaming and putting together some of the remediation for all of these things, PCBs especially. So if the testing were done on schools for maybe all of these things, could that be sort of put together with any of the HVAC remediation, that some of which is going on now? I understand that, but going forward, is that something that's been discussed or not?
That's not something that I've had discussions about.
Okay. But maybe the AOE folks have some insight into that. I don't know. Maybe Senator Perchlik has insight. I don't know to that.
Well, I feel like we do have two experts in Senator Lyons and Senator Perslick with school building health in all seriousness. So I think this is something that we should pull together the chair of APROPS and others to get a sense of how best to move forward, how best to prepare schools to do this work, get a sense of the funding that's going to be needed, and seeing if we have access to it. But one final question I had is back to the asbestos. You alluded, I think, or mentioned something about other air testing. I know asbestos can be used in glues. I don't know if they're still being used in glues, that would keep a rug together, things like that. I'm just thinking of a child center that could have this in its carpets, and activity on those rugs or carpets could get it into the air. And are we testing for it in the air like that?
We're not.
You're not. Okay.
There are statutory regulatory triggers for the need for testing, but it's not done as a matter of course in the way that lead water testing for lead is now required.
Okay. Okay, Senator Perslick, please.
One kind of related school health issue is just basically the oxygen levels in these classrooms. As Mr. Englander was referring to, it's when these levels become concentrated and you start breathing it a lot is really where the problem is. And so good HVAC can address those. But just having low oxygen levels is, I don't know if I guess it's sort of a health issue, but it's also just a learning issue for schools. Studies have shown that classrooms with better ventilation, the students do better, just because they're getting the oxygen they need. Their brains are getting the oxygen they need. So I don't know if it's the same level as the other things we're talking about today, but it's something. There are ASHRAE standards for how much ventilation you should have for classrooms, but I don't know if it's something that we would put in the same category as this. It's something I'm interested in investigating as we move forward on HVAC issues in schools.
Mr. Englander, did you have anything to say in response to that in any way? No. Okay. No. Yeah, and then I would say the other, and Senator Lyons has been a leader on things along the lines of keeping toxins out of children and families and labeling and all of those things that are so important. And that's a separate conversation, but I'm also, as it relates to rugs and things, but what happens, is there air testing? Is it triggered in any way when a construction project might happen in a school? In other words, back to your point, things are fine unless they are disturbed. The wall is taken down. Who knows if there's lead, if it's being or any kind of air testing, asbestos, et cetera, when those kinds of construction activities happen? Yeah,
so anytime there is construction activities that might possibly disturb asbestos and lead, there is a trigger for testing, not the air, but testing the materials themselves. And if the materials themselves test positive for lead and testing, for asbestos or lead, then certain then that becomes that remediation itself becomes regulated activity, and in order to minimize exposure.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Lyons?
I have a question.
Senator Chittenden.
So, Mr. Englander, thank you. My experience with asbestos, though, there's a caveat to what you just said. If it's a child care center that's in a home, if it's a private residence and they do a major upgrade to their facility, it is unclear to me whether or not that would trigger the same type of mandated state regulation if it's a home daycare center. Do you have any perspective on that aspect of asbestos treatment and remediation?
So the answer, it's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. Certainly, rental housing it's required. I don't know whether childcare center. It's just I'm not sure. I'm happy to get back to you on that.
That would be great if you would get back to and email our committee assistant and the entire committee. I'd appreciate that.
I'm happy to. I can tell you this, that even this came as a surprise to some legislators a few years ago when we worked on Senator Lyons will remember that when we worked on revamping the lead poisoning prevention chapter, and some members of the General Assembly were surprised to learn that you actually are prevented from even doing lead remediation in your home if that activity is dangerous. So if you have a floor that might have lead paint, you actually may not even sand, that floor. I just don't know to what extent that triggers. Those triggers are distinct in childcare facilities.
Great. Senator Hooker, final word.
Following up on that, Mr. Englander, are those restrictions related to the presence of children in the home? Or
No,
okay.
It's simply if you are creating an exposure pathway, that practice is forbidden.
Okay.
Thank you for being with us very much. I'm sorry, Senator Lyons.
I can't resist asking Mr. Englander, Dr. Englander. Anyway, Dr. Englander.
I'm a doctor of laws.
Yeah, you are. But probably this is going to be more of a rhetorical question for you, because I'm wondering if the Department of Health has been sort of contacted regarding the sinking of the Adirondack.
I'm unaware that we have been, but
Okay. Well, I mean, for me, it's a huge concern. So it would be interesting to know what the consequences of that are.
I will also follow up with the committee on that.
Thank you.
We know you're incredibly busy. We thank you for all the incredible work you and Dr. Levine and Ms. Dolan and the entire team have and continue to do on the pandemic front, and really appreciate all your work here today. And thank you for being with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
I look forward to it as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Committee, why don't we just stretch for just a few minutes and come back just a bit after 2:45, and we can hear from the Agency of Education. Good afternoon. Welcome back to Senate Education on Friday, April 2nd. We have with us members of the Agency of Education to talk about standardized testing. It has been, I know it's been in the press a little bit. I've heard a little bit here and there. And I would just, to be perfectly honest, I don't know everything that's happening. So I'm wondering, Dr. Boucher, if you and your team could just take us through, give us an update. Here we are in the era going through the pandemic. Students have standardized tests. It sounds like those tests may or may not be continuing. And what is that going to look like? Are they going to be on new technologies? Will these scores represent their actual abilities and talents, et cetera? So that's where we're at, and the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's delightful to be here, as always, with the Senate Education Committee. For the record, my name is Heather Boucher. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Education. And with me today are Dr. Wendy Geller, who is our Director for our Data Management and Reporting Division, and Dr. Amanda Gorham, who is our State Director of Assessment. So this is perfect. This is exactly what we came in thinking you might want to hear about, which is an update on where all things stand with respect to standardized testing and assessment, particularly this year. So as the committee members may know, USDOE offered some flexibility around standardized testing this year, which we are taking advantage of by submitting a waiver to request the flexibilities that are allowed to us as a state. So just as a brief update, the waiver, we have completed our portion of the waiver at the Agency of Education. So our proposed waiver request to USDOE, it is now posted on our website as of Tuesday, and it will remain on the website for public comment for 30 days, consistent with our usual public comment process, which USDOE is requiring that all states do this. After that, we will review each of the pieces of public comment that we receive. There's an email that's listed right there on the website with the waiver, and we will review those, take a look at those that might cause the agency to retool the proposal as is, and then we submit all of that. So we submit the proposed waiver, and then waiver request, and then all of the public comments to USDOE. So I think one of the big issues that we wanted to clarify right off the bat, and we also are getting a lot of questions, and so it's not surprising at all that committee members might be getting some questions from constituents. There is a misunderstanding potentially that folks believe that there's a misinterpretation between accountability and assessment, and I just want to clarify that. And so we're asking to waive and are allowed to ask to waive features of our state accountability, and I'll explain what that is in just a minute. What we're not allowed to ask a waiver on this year is testing itself. So when you see assessment, that's usually what the average person is thinking about. Is my kid going to do standardized testing this year? The answer is yes. And the answer is they are all going to do standardized testing in every state this year, because USDOE has not allowed any state to successfully argue that they can just forego standardized testing. So I think that's really important right off the bat. It's been a little bit confusing at the federal level because of the change in administration. So some states had actually put in a request to waive standardized testing whole bore, full sale, or as had it happened last year, actually. So that is a further confusion. And they've all been summarily rejected by USDOE. So their waivers have been sent back saying, no, you may not, we will not grant you the authority as a state to cancel standardized testing this year. So I just want to make sure that's clear, because I think that's where a lot of the questions are. So we don't have the authority to cancel standardized testing. No state does. U.S. Department of Education is requiring all of us to do some form of standardized testing. Where we do have flexibility, and if the committee is interested, it might be a little bit too much given our time today, but I think I did send over the actual waiver, and folks can take a look at that. And so the pieces that we are actually requesting are all of the allowable flexibilities through the waiver. And you can see that by looking at every box is checked in our request. So what we're actually asking for is, yes, we understand we have to do testing. Can we actually then remove the burden of accountability on our LEAs? And so accountability is what we typically use as the public face of how folks are doing, meaning how districts are doing. So it's the work, it's all of the information that's in the report card. It's how we actually make determinations for who gets additional funding under what are called comprehensive supports. So I know we have newer members and we haven't had a chance to talk about this much, but in the ESSA federal law, the lowest performing 5% of schools on our one component of which is our state assessments are actually identified each 3 years for what are called comprehensive supports, which means they qualify for additional supports from agency staff and additional funding to actually get at typically what are historically gaps for our historically marginalized youth, but also could be due to being in the bottom percent of performance or the bottom 5% in terms of student growth over time. So we, as most other states are, we are requesting that we actually not hold districts accountable this year for the results of these tests. We think that's a fair bargain, because we do think that this information that we are receiving can still be useful to schools and districts to actually take a look at at first, just to take a look at how the achievement test scores looked. We also have some concerns about the reliability and internal validity of these of our results, and we'll take a close look at that, obviously. The other piece I wanted to talk about is that we've also requested that our currently identified schools for comprehensive supports and targeted assistance in our state is what we call schools qualifying for equity supports. So around those marginalized groups, student districts that are actually, it's been a long week, I'm sorry, districts that are actually qualifying for supports around historically underserved populations also qualify for what are called, we call equity supports in our state. So we're actually asking, can we also, in addition to waiving accountability this year, can we also just kind of have a hold harmless in terms of who will be identified as in need of comprehensive supports and targeted supports? The idea there is that because of the pandemic, a good 2 year, at least a year and a half, if not 2 year chunk of the time for currently identified schools in need of comprehensive supports, they haven't had a chance to actually take advantage of their resources and take advantage of supports from the agency that would actually have helped them narrow some of those gaps, if that makes sense. So that's another reason why we're asking if we can just extend who's currently identified for another year. Again, this is very typical of what all states are doing. The only other thing I might say is that, and this Dr. Gorham might walk us through just very briefly. I know she has 2 minutes left. What's in the waiver is actually done from the agency's perspective after looking at a series of potential flexibilities that we considered and thought we could perhaps work with, such as some of those you've mentioned, Mr. Chair, such as remote deployment or administration of the test, such as a shortened test form. And for a variety of reasons, they don't really work for our state. And I will let Amanda maybe take a quick pass at that. I know you have to go, but I think that would be useful for the committee to know as well.
Great.
Sure. I'm happy to speak to the flexibilities. So back in the fall, we started having some conversations on a very frequent basis with our test vendors about the ways that we might be able to adjust the administration of our assessments this year, because we began very early on planning for all possible eventualities, any circumstances that we might find ourselves in at this time in the year. So very early on, we were informed that there were possibilities such as a remote administration, a shortened test form, changes to test windows. What we found over time, and this was really consistent regardless of the conditions, the remote administration posed some privacy concerns. And some equity concerns. To administer a test remotely, every student needs a stable internet connection for an extended duration of time, as well as a microphone and a computer, where the teacher is through a webcam watching the student take the test. They also need certain conditions in their home, like a quiet space, right? Or if they're a young student, they might need a parent to help them move through the assessment and use the technology. And so we found that to be really cumbersome and also not accessible to all of our students. There are also some sort of technical and validity related concerns, but it seemed like the practical risks associated were substantial enough on their own. With shortening the test, that option was only available for some of our assessments. It was not available to students who need accommodations on the assessment, our English learners. And so there was some pretty significant equity concerns, and again, also logistical concerns. And when we talk about moving the test window, our test window is already 3 months long. And so it's considerably a bit more roomy than really any other state in terms of the length of the window, and moving it into the summer or even in the fall. There's definitely some consequences that could be considered for that. And we felt like from, identifying values of equity and student well-being in all of our decision making, that moving forward with a standard administration of this assessment was going to be least burdensome, least stressful, and also have the best chance of producing the most useful information, considering the parameters that are set by the United States Department of Education. And so here we are, a little bit into the test window, and now providing technical assistance to the field. So there we go.
I'm not sure if this is for Dr. Boucher or Dr. Gorman, but what did we do last year? Same thing, similar situation? No, go ahead.
Sorry. No, we the U.S. Department of Education allowed states to just waive assessments. We just didn't do them at all last year.
Thank you. That's good. That's helpful to know. Senator Hooker.
Yes, thank you. So, Dr. Boucher, what will happen to those kids who are going to school remotely now? Will they have to go in to take a test? I know that in our area, it looks as if there's going to be testing this spring. What will happen? And I know the 95% requirement of kids testing. I mean, will they be exempt? Will they, is it possible that it's just not going to, you're not going to have to adhere to that?
Thank you, Senator Hooker. Great question. And that is one of the parts that I didn't mention, which is part of the accountability waiver request is a request to waive the 95% requirement. How that actually looks practically on the ground, if Amanda, do you have just a couple more minutes just to talk that through? I know we have had several students already testing who you might know if some of them are remote or not and coming in. I'm not sure, but that practical piece, that's exactly why I have Dr. Gorham here, because she's more close to the ground than I am.
I'm so happy to respond to that. So in terms of the ways that we are sort of positioning the requirement to participate in assessment this year, we have issued guidance to the field that, as in any other year, every student must be offered the assessment. And for students that are learning remotely, you could reasonably say that what that looks like is a school, providing the testing dates to the family and saying that they would need to come in for testing. We also understand that there may be circumstances where students are learning remotely because they have significant medical concerns and they, haven't been outside their home in 12 months. And so we've worked with our test vendors to develop some forms of documentation for non-participation, where we're sort of coding these instances where there really is this, logical rationale of why students are learning remotely and also cannot assess in person. And so that's not a federally recognized exemption, but we're doing our best to make sure that we have some qualitative data to understand instances of non-participation. And this transfers into that accountability piece. The 95% participation threshold is really, it's a consequence associated with low participation. So the participation requirements, practically speaking, are, to paraphrase, any student who is publicly funded and or enrolled in a public school must participate if they're in one of the applicable grade levels in statewide assessments. So that participation requirement still holds this year, which is why we've advised the field to offer the assessment to all students typically required to assess. The 95% participation threshold that would be waived through this process that Dr. Boucher has spoken about would relax the consequences associated with low participation. So at a school level or a district level, they get an average scaled score. And if the participation rate is below 95%, that average score is weighted by the participation rate. So that's where that piece comes in. And so if this waiver is approved by US Ed, then that will not hold this year. There would not be consequences in terms of accountability associated with a lower participation rate. We do anticipate having some issues with participation this year because, again, we are keeping student safety and health in mind as we administer these assessments. And there will not be these consequences if the waiver is accepted by the United States Department of Education.
I think one of my concerns, and I think it has been answered by Dr. Gorham, and that is, I hate to see a child get tossed onto a computer unless they really not only had good access, internet access, but also had a level of fluency with the computer. I mean, because of issues of inequity, there are children out there that I'm sure spend a lot of time on the computer, and then children that don't have as much time. And it sounds as though that that is being addressed. Would you agree, Dr. Gorham?
I believe that that is being addressed to the best of our ability. Again, given the parameters that we're working with under US Ed, equity has been sort of our guidepost in all of the decisions that we've made thus far. And we really feel like, given the circumstances and the requirements that are set by US Ed, we have made the best decisions possible in terms of equity, and also in terms of being able to look at these results through the lens of equity, to start to understand sort of the story of what happened this year and even a little bit into last year, so that we can start to move forward.
Okay. Other questions, please? Any final comments or other things? Dr. Geller, anything that you would like to add?
No, I think Deputy Secretary Boucher and Dr. Gorham have done a great job. I think it really covers the care that we have approached this situation with this year. And I think there's no better team than the one that Dr. Gorham's leading at the moment. We're very glad that she's here with us, and we're very fortunate to have someone of her caliber and expertise leading the crew now.
Great. It was nice to hear. Thank you. Dr. Boucher, any final words?
Nope. I think, as Dr. Geller just said, I think that we have covered what we wanted to with the committee. Certainly always open. If folks have follow-up questions, please don't hesitate. I'm actually really pleased to let you get to meet both Dr. Geller, if you haven't yet, and Dr. Gorham. I don't want Wendy to sell herself short. She's a pretty fantastic component of our wonderful data division as well.
Wonderful. Well, Doctor, thank you very much for a very lively, important, informative conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have a great weekend, all.
Thank you.
Committee, I think we're just waiting on Jeannie. I know that you mentioned our next lineup was going to be on S100.
Yes, and I've emailed them. I haven't heard back from them. I told them that we were ready for them.
Okay, so why don't we come back in 5 minutes? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Senate Education on the afternoon of April 2nd. We have on our agenda to take a look at S100, the funding for the Universal School Meals Bill that came out of Agriculture has been ordered to lie, but with the understanding that Senate Education is going to look at funding. And so we know that this is something that has the agency or the Agriculture Committee has been working hard on, and they've taken a stab at a few different approaches. Right now, we have an approach that has been put forward that the chairs of Ag, Ed, Approps, and the Pro Tem have discussed. And with that, I will turn the floor to you, Ms. Benham, or Mr. Desmarais. I'm not sure who, I've already forgotten who's going to go first.
Sure, I'm Catherine Benham with the Joint Fiscal Office. And Jim, do you want me to just lay it out and then you walk through the draft? Is that, how would you like to proceed?
That sounds perfect. Yep.
Okay. So I think the concept of one of the discussions is about, with the universal meals, is who would you cover and how many students do you cover? And I believe that the current proposal is to add in the students who would qualify for Dr. Dynasty. So it would expand the number of students who qualify to some, but not all students, clearly. And the thought is that you would do that starting July 1st, 2022, which will then give you time to figure out the logistics, because I think you will hear from the agents of education that creates some logistical issues, and there are some to work out. But if you start it in July of next year, that would give you time to work it through. And I'm trying to think about what else you'd have. I guess you want to make sure, I guess a couple things that I want to just make that you will see in the draft that when Jim goes through it is that you want to make sure that you don't lose any federal funding. That's one of the goals, is you want to continue to draw down as much federal funding as you're getting currently. So that's the piece where you want to make sure the schools continue to apply for federal funding, and the state will just supplement the extra portion of it. And the other concept is that it would be supplemented through the education fund. So it would become another line item in the education fund, similar to special ed or transportation aid. And that cost, the additional cost, which we're estimating is $12 million, would be reimbursed to schools, but it would be a cost that would be borne by the education fund. And that is sort of the big picture discussion. Is that enough? And we can
let's pause there just to thank you for that. That was terrific. Any questions on that? So we're really increasing eligibility standards, or those standards would be adjusted to increase eligibility. Senator Lyons.
Yeah, so that was my question. So there'll still be eligibility determination within each school district. It won't simply be it won't simply be the cost coming out of the ed fund. The schools will have to do something to get the additional funds.
You will not be funding every child.
Okay.
You'll be funding children who qualify for. You will be adding in the kids up to the Dr. Dinosaur who qualify for Dr. Dinosaur who don't currently qualify. So that would be the additional students. So there is an eligibility, and I think maybe when testimony, when Jim goes to the draft, you'll see some of that laid out. But that is correct, and that cost is about $12 million. If you go to all students, the range is 24 to 50, I think is. So this is a smaller program than that full on cost would be.
Senator Perslip and then Senator Hooker.
Yeah, thank you. So how is this different, the funding? Like if it's going to be what I heard you saying sounded like categorical grants, like which is what I consider we do for transportation, but maybe I have the term wrong. How is that different the way we're doing it now? Is the education fund supporting the schools, like those schools that already do universal free meals?
Yes.
How would that be?
So it's an interesting question. Actually, another thing for you to consider is the general fund is currently funding those schools that do that. It's a general fund obligation. So it's an interesting question, policy question about, do you continue having some general fund and some education fund? And that's what one difference. Right now, we also fund those schools directly. Let me also say to you, one of the interesting things going through this discussion that was complicating is that some schools carry the meal costs in their budget, and some have enterprise funds, so it's out of their budget, and some actually do a little bit of both. So different schools treat the meal costs differently related to their budget, which complicates some of the other variations that people have proposed. And that's sort of one reason to provide a year's delay, also to give time to work through some of that. But also the categorical aid also makes it is one way to provide the resources. And Be a reimbursement is my understanding also, is the thinking that it would be a reimbursement.
Which part would be reimbursement?
Well, they're all reimbursed, but this particular, the ed fund cost would be reimbursed. So schools would have to submit some kind of paperwork like they do now, and they would get reimbursed. I don't know, maybe Jim, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I can cover it on the walkthrough.
Senator Hooker.
So just to clarify, the cost would be borne by the ed fund, the 12 million up to the, to cover the kids who are Dr. Nassar eligible.
Okay. And some
That's
of I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Bean.
Well, the current, assuming you don't change the other piece of it, the general fund would continue to cover what it's currently covering. And this would be but the 12 million is the additional cost that would be borne by the ed fund. And yes.
Okay. And before we jump, please, Senator Lyons.
Well, I'll probably save my question, but I'm trying to sort out Dr. Dinosaur kids because every child in the state is really eligible for Dr. Dinosaur. So what are we separating out here? Is this, we're using income levels, right? So maybe we should look at that information, but this is not resonating. I'm trying to sort it out.
I think that's
I might defer to somebody like Jen Carby, or maybe Jim that has talked to Jen more about it.
Jim, so the question, Dr. Dinosaur, all young, is it all children under 18? Generally.
So let me, can I just back up to frame this a bit, and now I can answer your question?
Please.
So under current law, and I don't have all the percentages here, but there are 3 categories currently under current law where there is payment for school meals. Payment by the state or by the feds, or both. The first is for free meals. So I believe that is if you are at or below the poverty level, you get free meals paid for by the next level is reduced price meals. And I believe that's something like 138%, don't quote me, of the poverty level. And that obviously gives more kids reduced price meals. And what happens now with reduced price meals is the feds pay a part of it, and then the rest is up to the parents to pay, but the state comes in and pays it for the parents. So currently, free meals are paid for and reduced price meals are paid for, and there's no cost to the students for those meals. The third category is paid meals. Paid meals, it's for the cost of a meal for, let's just say, a wealthier family. The government pitches in a portion, like maybe 30 cents a meal, to the school district to help pay for those meals. So there's free, there's reduced, and there's paid. On the paid meal side, there would be a contribution from the families to pay the difference. This creates a fourth category for students who are eligible for Dr. Dinosaur. And I don't know much about Dr. Dinosaur, but I did get an email from Jen saying that essentially for students up to the age of 19 years of age, they get, they're eligible at the 317% of free of FPL. So it basically brings those kids in, and that's what this bill does. It provides free breakfast and lunch to students who are eligible for Dr. Dinosaur, and let's say it's 317%. So they get that benefit, but not if it's paid for already by state or federal funds. So whatever is currently paid by state and federal funds is paid for. And this is an additional state funding mechanism for these students who are eligible for Dr. Dinosaur. if that helps. And that last one comes off the top of the ed funds.
Okay. So would you say a few words about off of the top of the ed fund? What does that mean exactly?
That means it'll be a cost to the ed fund, funded by the sources of funding for the ed fund, obviously sales taxes and whatnot, and property tax revenues. So therefore, every time you increase the expenses of the ed fund on balance, you can expect the yield to go down and property taxes across the state to go up.
Senator Hooker.
So, thank you. The students up to 19 who would be eligible for Dr. Dinosaur and up to 217% of poverty. Is that what I heard?
It's 317, 317.
So the students who are left are students who would be eligible for Dr. Dinosaur or not.
So students who benefit from this are students who are above the free and reduced price lunch percentages, okay, and are equal to or below the Dr. Dinosaur 317. Those kids get now a free breakfast and lunch. Students who are above the qualification for Dr. Dinosaur still would not receive state or federal funding for that.
So I guess we would need to know like what percentage of students does that mean?
I don't know. That would be a probably AOE question. Yeah.
I believe I heard that this proposal would bring in roughly 16,000 more students. I heard this morning, but
what does that do to the percentage of students who are now getting free lunch, free meals, including the schools that already do it?
If I might, I think Brianna Parker, who was not available now, could probably come in. Why don't you, if you could have her in? She worked on the numbers, so she could speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Benham, do you have a sense of what 317% of FPL looks like for the committee? In other words, who are we capturing here by making this change?
That's a great question. I don't have it off the top, but I will. I bet I can get the answer for you. Well, if Jim wants to start on the other.
When I say 317, just to give you more detail behind that number, it's 312% with a 5% income disregard. I have no idea what a 5% income disregard means, but so Jen says really it's 317. So
I will email and hopefully I'll get an answer back from somebody about, you're asking like what a typical income level would be, I think.
So, if, and I don't know if Mark, if you know that number, but what I'm trying to get a sense of is we are trying, and I think the bill is trying to address those students most in need of food, of nourishment. And so we are now including additional students and families that otherwise have not been part of the free meal programs. And so what does that really look like on paper? Is that a mom and dad with $70,000 combined household income, or are we now getting into, and I'm not saying that I would be against this, a mom and dad who might be making a little bit more or less? We had some conversations in committee when we were talking about expanding access to our state colleges. And I think we all realized that 80 or 90,000 combined household income with a few children is a lot different today than it was back when Old Man Campion was growing up. Very, very, very different. So life has become much, much, much more expensive. Mr. Pearl?
I was just going to point out that the federal guidelines are based on household size, so it varies. And I don't know if you found it, Catherine, there's a table. If you punch in federal poverty levels for Vermont, There'll be a table. It'll show you by household size and by household income what the cutoff is. The last table I looked at didn't break it off at 317% of poverty, but there were some breakdowns that were pretty close.
Okay. Senator Purcell, please.
So each state has its own federal poverty level, because I just looked up what federal poverty level was, and it said it was, so for a family of three, 300% would be like $66,000. But maybe Vermont's is different.
I'm not sure.
I think I'm coming up with the same, but it makes me a little nervous because I am no expert in Dr. Dinosaur. So I don't know what I'd want to, let's just confirm it, but I'm getting, for 4 people family, $84,000 if I use what is published on a Google, but let me
Okay.
with that.
Any other immediate questions before Mr. Desmarais takes us through the bill itself? Senator Persick, did you have another follow-up or any other technical questions or general questions from anyone? Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Well, maybe we'll get this as we walk through, but I guess I'm trying to understand better how the current system works. And is this another complication, or does this make anything easier? And just like like right now, the school districts get the money from the federal government directly for those free and reduced meals. And it seems like we're saying, so for the free meals, you get the federal money. For the reduced meals, you get the federal money. For those that are over 317, you get it from the parents. But those that are over the federal law, you'll get it from the education fund. You got
one thing there, if I could, just on the free, yes, federal, on the reduced, a mixture of federal and state funds.
Right.
And then this would be state funds for the Dr. Dinosaur. So just to clarify, sources of funding.
Right. And then they'd also get some from the parents for those that are above the 317.
Correct.
So it does create another category of students. When you hear from the Agency of Education, they will talk about that. And I know it creates one more category. So you're correct. And that's one more reason to wait a year to figure out how to administer, make sure you can make it easy to administer.
Senator Campion, may I? Jim, you mentioned on the third category with the paid meals, there is money that's paid 30 cents a meal or whatever it was. Is that from the federal government?
Yes, the federal government to the school districts.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Not seeing any other immediate questions. Jim, if you wouldn't mind, I'm sorry, Senator Lyons.
I just need to ask again. So if we do this, suppose we've had this in place and all the administrative activities are being worked out, that still means that the 78 schools I forgot the number of schools that currently provide everything, all the meals for kids, they would not be in this. They would not be in this administrative process. That's a question. Would they be in this administrative process? Or are we starting all over and all schools would be restructuring and structuring this process?
I can't answer that question for you, Senator Lyons. What I can say, I guess, is that currently those schools offering universal school meals are funding those meals, which are not the part that's not paid for by state or federal funding. They're funding that from their school budget or from an enterprise fund. So they're bearing the extra cost of providing universal school meals. This would provide a source of funding that they could take advantage of, I would think, to get some state funding for what they're paying for now with their school budget or from their enterprise fund.
Okay, so has that switch over, which would be an increased cost to the state, been considered in the fiscal note? I mean, suppose all the schools currently offering free and reduced switched over to this program, that would increase the appropriation each year, period. Has that been considered?
I'm going to ask Brianna. It's a great question, and I'm going to ask Brianna, who's unavailable right now, but I will ask her that question.
Okay, that's good because look, if it comes out close,
Yeah.
it'll help me make a decision very quickly.
And, if I could just jump in here for a second, I think that right now, school kids receive free lunches if they're meeting the requirements. So the money either comes out of federal aid, or in the case of kids getting a reduced price lunch, it's a combination of federal and state aid. I don't believe any of that changes under this legislation. This would only affect the students that are above 185% of poverty. They're currently not eligible to get reduced price lunches. That answer your question? No.
Well, sort of, but if the schools switch to this new program, that will add those kids who are 185% of poverty.
I don't think there's any intention to change the way that schools are reimbursed for meals currently.
Right, but Mark, she's just saying that right now the schools are picking up all the kids between 185 and 317%. And the question is, in the calculation that Brianna made on the estimate, did she assume that those schools would now qualify for that reimbursement?
No, my understanding is the only schools that are doing that are the community eligible provision schools that are currently providing all of it, and it's all federal aid, even though those kids don't qualify.
Okay, there.
Okay.
It may not affect the thing, but let's get the answer from Brianna.
Okay, just to read it off here, 60% of the students are on free and reduced, and it's all federal funding. So nothing would change that way.
Okay.
And those are providing meals to everybody, regardless of income.
Because those schools qualify, so that wouldn't increase the cost. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Jim, do you mind taking us through the bill?
Sure. So just a second to frame the history, just so you know where it stands. This was an ag bill. It's an ag bill. Initially, it had both universal school meals for all kids, paid for out of school budgets, and it had a local food grant program as well. Senate Appropriations took it up. They stripped out the local food program language. They left the rest of it, more or less. And that's where it stands now. It was on the House Senate floor. The amendment you're about to see is a floor amendment with an unnamed senator offering this amendment. So I think somebody's looking for volunteers. So here's the bill. Yes, here's, yep. Let me make that a bit bigger. Okay, so for the record, Jim Damer, Let's Council, we're walking through draft 2.1 of a draft floor amendment to the report on the Committee on Appropriations on S100.
Jim, are you bringing that up, or are you wanting us to look on?
Oh, I'm sorry. I brought up for myself and didn't bother bringing up for you. I'm sorry. Where is it right here? Okay. Here we go again. Yeah, make that a bit bigger. Okay. Okay. So this is a strike all. So the title will be the expansion of school breakfast and lunch programs. Section 2 is amending the whole subchapter on school food programs. So you see lots of sections in Section 2 being amended. And first, our definitions, these are minor technical editorial changes, so nothing to focus on here substantively. So award of grants is where we have the first substantive change. Subsection or subdivision C1 here is existing statute, and the change is only here. Just what this does, this is where the state pays for the reduced price lunches. So this is a state grant program or reimbursement program to take the student share that would be there of reduced price lunches and has it paid by the state. What's new here is just 2A. And this is where we get into Dr. Dinosaur. So this says is from state funds appropriated to the agency for this purpose, the agency shall reimburse each school district that made available school breakfast and lunch to students at no charge under a subdivision we'll come on to for the cost of each meal actually provided in the district during the previous quarter to the extent that cost is not reimbursed through funds or other state funds.
Jim,
This section here that we're referring to is the Dr.
Jim.
Dinosaur language.
Jim, you're breaking up a lot. I don't know if it's possible for you to maybe go off screen. Sometimes that helps so that
Okay. Yep. Let me do that.
maybe make it a little clearer.
Gotta find. So, okay. Is that better?
Yep, right now it is. Thanks.
Okay. So this section 2A, again, if you couldn't hear me, is basically creating a reimbursement program to cover Dr. Dinosaur, which we'll come to later on in this section, 1264A1. And then it says reimbursement amounts paid under this section will be from the Ed Fund. So this is the top of the Ed Fund, and it'll be added to the quarterly payments that are received by school districts. Okay, now we move on to changes to the food program section. And what this does is the first A1A here is all about free and reduced price lunches. So it's not the focus of Dr. Dinosaur, but it is changing because it used to be that school food that school programs had to be done in the school district. Now each school has to offer free and reduced price lunches under this language. I think they do anyway, but it clarifies that. And this is important language. School districts shall maximize access to federal funds for the cost of school breakfast and lunch program. And there are different ways of doing that under federal law. But the important point here is they have to maximize their drawdown of federal funds. And here's where we get to Dr. Dinosaur. So it says, in addition to operating the free and reduced price lunches, each school board operating a public school should cost to operate within each school in the school district the same school lunch and the same school breakfast program made available for free and reduced price lunches. Make that same breakfast and lunch available for each attending student who is eligible for health coverage through the Dr. Dinosaur program administered by the Agency of Human Services every school day at no charge. And that's where we get to the 317% reimbursement for those kids. And then just language that is not necessary, but it points out to school districts that to the extent the costs are not reimbursed through federal or state funds or other sources, the cost of making available school lunches and breakfast are borne by school districts. Then we go on, we have new language that says, in operating a school breakfast and lunch program, a school district shall seek to achieve the highest level of student participation, which may include any or all of the following: providing breakfast meals that can be picked up by students, so-called grab and go, making breakfast available to students in classrooms after the start of the school day, and collaborating with the school's wellness community advisory council to plan school meals. And then E says that Each school district shall request from the parent or guardian of each student to complete the household income form provided by the Agency of Education, which is used to determine a family's economic status, to determine eligibility for various state and federal programs. And this requirement shall not apply if the school district obtains equivalent information through another means. So this is designed to guarantee that school districts are getting the information they need to determine qualification for both free and reduced price lunches, and now Dr. Dinosaur as well. This language really hasn't changed very much. This goes to the goal to have local produce used. So not really about universal meals. Then this section is struck out. This section would have provided a 1-year exemption, or the possibility of a 1-year exemption for school districts from offering food programs, and that's being struck out. And then we have section 3, which is dealing with the excess spending penalty. It's in blue here because I don't think it's necessary anymore. It's been in the bill from the beginning of time, because when it was initially a bill about universal meals paid for by school districts, then they could easily maybe run over the excess penalty threshold, and therefore this would have exempted them. But now this bill is having the education fund pick up that extra cost. So I don't know that this is necessary, but I didn't want to delete that without at least you having a chance to consider this. So that's so basically for excess spending penalty purposes, it's taking out the cost incurred by school districts in providing school breakfast and lunch. Then we go on to section 4, which is again making sure that there is sufficient information to determine eligibility for free and reduced price lunches and for Dr. Dinosaur eligibility. So this has the secretary defining student poverty for purposes of qualification for federal funds by school districts, establishing what data should be collected by school districts to qualify, and the means and frequency of collection, and how it should be reported to the agency and the frequency of that. And then require school districts to collect this data that's necessary to qualify for federal funds based on student poverty, and report the data to the Agency of Education. And then there's some session law around this topic. First, section 5 says that school districts shall count time spent by students consuming school meals during class as instructional time. There's a transition provision saying that school districts have 5 years. The Dr. Dinosaur program eligibility comes into force under this bill on July 1, 2022. So this gives 5 years from that date till 27 for school districts to comply with offering meals to students under this new Dr. Dinosaur level. So they have a five-year phase-in. Section 7 provides a staff position at the Agency of Education, specializing in the administration of school food programs. And there's an appropriation from the ESSER 3 funds for this of $100,000. Section 8 talks about the calculation it talks about how the tax letter every year in December will be calculated for fiscal year 23. So in fiscal year 23, it's the first time Dr. Dinosaur comes into effect. There'll be a $12 million addition or estimate additional cost to the ed fund. This is saying when you're doing that December letter projecting yields and property tax rates, JFO will use, or the commission will use this increase of 12 million in that calculation. And then there's requirement for the agency to consult with the V's and school business officials and School Nutrition Association of Vermont on the impact of the act, and to consult with the Agency of Human Services around the income eligibility standards. And then lastly, there's a requirement for the agency to report to the House and Senate Committees on Appropriation and Education on the status of implementation. Effective dates, section 2, which is the whole school food program section, which is where Dr. Dinosaur comes in. In section 6, the transitional provision take effect on July 1, 2022, and the remaining sections take effect this year on July 1st. And then after passage, the bill would be amended to read an act relating to the expansion of school breakfast and lunch programs. And that is it.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Jim. Mr. Demright. Senator Perslick.
Going from the bottom up, the section 9, where it talks about talking with the Agency of Human Resources on the income eligibility standards set forth in this act. What are the income eligibility standards set forth in this act?
Oh, that is a reference to standards for eligibility for free and reduced and for now Dr. Dinosaur.
So are they just saying, is the Dr. Dinosaur eligibility standards the right one? I mean, like, I just don't understand what they're going to be consulting with them, but like how they're verifying that the parents meet it, because, you know, it says they have to fill out the form. Is this, I'm not really clear what this consulting about the verification of the standards, is it just about whether the parents actually meet it or not? Like how they're going to make sure it's an honest assessment of the family's income? Is that what they're talking about?
I'm hoping that Catherine can help with that, because I wasn't involved in the discussions behind this.
I think some of the discussion is trying to figure out how to make it administratively easy. If you have a Dr. Dinosaur card, is there a way to figure out who's eligible? What is the easiest way to figure out who would qualify?
Catherine, you're muted.
Sorry, apologies. The question is trying to make it as easy as possible to figure out who's eligible. So the question is there something on the Dr. Dinosaur card? It's really about how do you facilitate administratively how does the school figure out who's eligible, and how can we do it easily for both the school and the families? And so I don't think that we know that answer right now.
I just wondered if does that conflict with the earlier, it says that each school district shall request the parent or guardian to fill out the capitalized, so it's like a proper noun, the household income form, which is determined if a family's economic status. So they're doing that, but then they're also consulting about whether Dr. Dinosaur is the right thing, but you would need that if you had this. So that's my question. And I wondered if anybody knew, could, instead of saying shall request, can they require families to fill this out?
Jim, do you want to take that one?
Well, can they require? I mean, if families, I don't think they can require it, but if families don't fill out the form, then they're not going to get the benefit.
Right, but that was part of the issue, is that families that are eligible don't fill it out for other reasons. So I wondered if everybody had to do it, whether you made $1 million or $10, it kind of levels that issues. Like everybody has to do it. So we're not only requiring, quote unquote, poor families to fill it out, where every parent has to fill it out, and it's just for the school's benefit. So can we require it? And If we can't, why can't we? Or why can't the schools?
I imagine you could require it, but there are federal guidelines here. It's used by the federal government as well. So I think the best answer to your question would come from AOE on that.
Okay.
And you're hoping, Senator Perchlik, I mean, you're looking to pull down additional funds by requiring it.
That's one thing, but also increasing participation and decreasing stigmatizing people that fill it out. You know, just saying like everybody has to fill it out because it's to the benefit of the school, because there's other things connected to your income. Even if you're a family, you know, we heard in other meetings outside of the committee of colleagues that said, well, my family was eligible for free and reduced lunch, but my parents wouldn't allow us to take it because they didn't want to be seen that way or taking a handout. So not only the federal money, but just not making a delineation between the families, just saying you got to fill it out, and then using that as the ability to draw the federal money or the state money down.
You know, that we could simply, okay, this is I'm going to be taking 1,000 steps backwards, but we could simply say everybody is covered, and we're going to put, if you want to contribute to the school food program, then have a collection. You know, after a while, I wonder how many kids are going to be left out, unless it is a requirement. I'm just thinking it's every step we're taking, 2 steps we're going forward, we're taking at least 1 backwards. It doesn't feel like we're accomplishing what we have set out to accomplish. It's just,
You mean how many students?
I need to ponder on this one.
Right. Okay. All right. Senator Chittenden.
So I want to connect Senator Lyons' comment as well as Senator Perchlik. So it seems like one of the driving reasons for this was to address the stigma associated to getting help with seeking food. And I'm married to a teacher, and she comments that this is a real thing, that kids really don't, they will not eat. And so we want to just have food available. What's unclear to me in your walkthrough, Jim, and I've loved what you did on previous bills where you just really step back and tell us what it's doing and what it's not doing. Will there still be a cash register in the cafeterias where people are collecting from kids at lunch and at breakfast? Or is this getting to that universal meals where there's just going to be food available, and some of them are going to be paid from the federal government and some of them are going to be paid through some payment activity that occurs outside of the cafeteria?
So the answer to that is there still will be a cash register at the schools. The original bill, Senate Ag, was universal. So I'll pay for by the school district, of course, but I'll pay for no cash register necessary because it's all universal. But this doesn't do that. This creates a 4th category of eligibility, but doesn't. There's still students who would be eligible for this benefit.
So before we lose at least one senator I know, I do want to have a little bit of a committee discussion because I think I need some guidance with regard to where the committee is. And as I see it, you know, we could certainly go back to the original bill, which again, joint fiscal. We know that other people have said other things, but I'm going to stick with joint fiscal's estimates of roughly 25 million to 40 million. It's going to impact the ed fund. Universal definitely would get rid of the stigma. There's this proposal where I think it's less of a hit to the ed fund. We're talking now about, and I'm going to look to Jim and Catherine to edit anything I'm saying, less of an impact. It's being put forward, I think, largely feeling as though this would get to our neediest Vermonters and increase the number of needy Vermonters who could participate. Sounds like the stigma we would still be dealing with. And then there are third options, and I guess I would wait for colleagues to bring those forward. But right now, just knowing those 2 options, I'd like to get a sense of where people are, because what I need to go back to the corner office and appropriations and say, if we want to go back to number 1, which is the universal school meals and those dollars from the ed fund, I think we need to kind of give them that heads up. So Senator Perchlik, do you want to start by just, if you're ready to weigh in a little bit, your thoughts on where you'd like to land, or?
Yeah, well, I was supportive of the universal meals, but so I guess I need to hear a little bit from those that were pushing this about why they thought that, how difficult that was. But I wondered if there was a way to basically require all the families to fill out this form, get all the federal money we can, and then have the state, pick up more. But if people are concerned about let's say it's 40 million ongoing after the federal money is gone, then can we basically require schools to do a no cash register system? Like some schools have already done that, right? We already have 78 that do that, but that they still can collect money from, Senator Chittenden there. We don't want to let him off free, so that those families that can afford it still are said, but make it to where it's just an annual fee. It's like, you got a child, it's this much, pay it once. And then there's no cash transactions in the cafeteria. So I wondered if there's a way to do a little bit of both, but.
I like that personally. I love that. I mean, I really do. I mean, to get rid of the cash register, rethink things, one-time payment or multiple payments that are happening, through the mail or something like that, where we can really work to remove the stigma. And I think Ms. Benham has an email into Ms. Parker to find out whether or not we can, or somebody's looking into, maybe AOE will have them in around the issue of requiring everybody to fill out a form. I mean, we require, for example, physicals, we require vaccine. There are a lot of things that we require as a state, and filling something out seems like it might be something that might be doable. Senator Chittenden.
I'm really of the same mind as what Senator Perchlik just laid out, and I like how you framed it. Except for the Mr. Chittenden, you painted me as a rich guy that has tons of money.
Right. Oh yeah. Okay.
I've qualified before that me and my wife were very much middle class, and I last year paid $1,500 to our local cafeteria programs for my 3 kids, about $500 per year. I'm just saying, if it's anything less than that, then I'm still making out better. But I love the idea that you just said, Senator Perchlik. If we can find a way to get the cash register out of the cafeteria while still having the families that have the ability to pay, that are paying now, to contribute something to fund universally accessible, good, healthy food in our schools. That's my North Star on this. That's where I want to get to. It just seems we need to find the funding path to get there.
So I just want to go back to your comments just to clarify. So, I mean, you do like the idea, the moving away from the stigma, requiring people to fill out the funds. If this is, are you thinking the universal school meal that could still be in the $40 million ed fund, or are you thinking the Dr. Dinosaur?
Is that directed at me, sir?
Yes, please.
So I think what I'm interpreting from this very complex discussion today, that we can get $10 or $12 million from Dr. Dinosaur to expand the eligibility. Right. But in my mind, the way Senator Perchik laid it out, if I, as a parent of 3 kids, and I got to tell you, I have 3 kids, and when I fill out forms at the beginning of the year, it's a stack this thick. It's like 30 to 50 forms that I'm just used to doing, especially when it's a new kid. So it's not that far-fetched to add another form on there related to this. And if in that process, I enter my income information, whatever's needed, and it's stated to me that I'm expected to pay, pick a number, this much a month, this much a year. I set up my school bucks now as a parent anyway. So just tell me what I owe, and then if I parent without it, then I won't pay, and that would come off the Dr. Dinosaur. If you get those parents to fill those forms out with the expectation they're going to contribute to have universally available healthy food, I think in my back of the envelope math, Senator Campion, you're going to get from the Tom and Kim Chittendens, the middle class parents that are already paying and are expecting to pay, you're going to get $10 to $20 million. Just doing the math of if you get half of the kids to contribute, that's $50,000. You get $100 a semester, or pick a number. And when I do the math out, it's $10 to $12 to $20 million, depending on what numbers you pick, to get you halfway there, and the other half would come from the Dr. Dinosaur, as you described. But I got to tell you, I didn't quite understand everything that was presented today with this Dr. Dinosaur. It's going to be transparent. So thank you, Senator Lyons, for sort of echoing that. It makes me feel better as a new senator. I think I need to rewatch what was presented today in slow motion.
I'm sure everybody will be rewatching it, I'm sure. Senator Hooker, please.
It's a confusing issue, so it's not easily understood. I just want to go back to your comment, Senator Campion, that we're trying to feed the neediest kids in Vermont. However, we also recognize that good nutrition helps all the kids, and that all of our kids are entitled to that type of nutrition. So I would like, I still would like to see, first of all, I'd like to know how many kids are we talking about that would not be covered if we go to the Dr. Dinosaur mode, and what's going to happen to those schools that are at 60% of their kids are free and reduced lunches. Are they still going to be able to get all of their kids free lunches, free meals? And what happens to those schools that have chosen to go universal? There are just a lot of questions, and I wish it were a simpler fix. And I still keep going back to the concerns that we heard from the superintendents, that they would like to see the state picking up the tab. So if it's from the ed fund totally, then is that a possibility? So there are just a lot of questions still.
Senator Lyons.
I don't think it helped.
Yeah, I mean, all those questions are there. I don't think I think we still are looking for some answers, and requiring people to fill out financial forms, I think might be, I'm not sure that is possible. So we'll find out. But, and I agree, the stigma associated with this is significant, period.
Yeah.
And how many kids we leave out could be significant, and the schools that are already doing it and how they modify to come into the fold. So I would like to know what would happen if, I'm sorry to go backwards on this. I did like what Senator Perchlik was saying. I think that might be a possible solution, but I'd like to compare it with taking the money right off the top of the ed fund and sort of figure that one out a little bit. So.
Yeah, Catherine, would you say a word or two?
Sure.
And before I just want to say, I'm going to have to leave,
right,
because I have an appointment that I have to get to, and I'm stretching it a little, but I didn't realize that it was going to be coming up so quickly. So.
No problem. And I've canceled our last witness, so we'll stick with this for a little while longer, recognizing that it's busy days. But let's get a few more questions answered. Ms. Benham.
Sure. So when you say you take it off the top of the ed fund, it becomes another cost. I think Jim actually did a nice job explaining earlier. So it's a $12 million cost, and it is funded by all the revenues. And assuming the revenues stay the same, the additional money will come from the property tax rate. So, if revenues go up more than expected, that will help also. But that's your funding sources. Are those the funding sources? So anytime you put a cost onto it, it has to get paid somehow. And it could be the revenue. You could also choose to raise one of the tax rates on one of the other taxes as well. Some tax you need to get the revenue from somewhere. So the 12 million to.
I think, why do we even say, so taking it off of the ed fund, how does that differ than, the original version of the bill that didn't have it taken off the top of the ed fund?
So in that particular case, it is borne by, it shows up in your local school budget. This may or may not show in your budget, but you're going to have revenues to offset it as well. Whereas the other one, I think it would show up on your total budget, and some people don't care for that. But as I said, it sounds like the school budgets are all, it's carried differently across different schools. So that's a complicated, that complicates it a lot, because people get nervous about increasing their school budget as well and selling the budget, even when the revenues are coming in or not.
Right. So, I mean, if we decided not, for example, to take it off the top of the ed fund and we went to the original version of the bill, you're less likely to have people cutting faculty, staff, other things if it comes off the top in a way, since it's not in that regular, local school budget. I mean,
yes.
That's a
Yes,
tough.
no, it depends. Once again, it depends on how the local school carries the school meals, whether it's in their budget or not. But yeah, I don't want to speak to what they would cut or not cut, but it's more like special ed or transportation aid where you can show a line item. I think some people prefer that. That is an argument for waiting another year because I feel like I don't understand. None of us completely understand the schools and how they carry it. And people say off the top of the ed fund, but it's not that simple. That I guess it seems like that's an easy thing, but somebody has to pay for it somehow. And the question is, how does it show up and how does it get reimbursed? Yeah. And that's up for you all to think through and decide.
You want to weigh in on this at this point? I know you're back. Might be too early for you to be thinking about these things since we've been in it, but any thoughts?
Yeah. Appreciate it, Senator Campion, and glad to be back. A couple weeks ago when we voted on this out of committee, I was a little uneasy about the bill, I guess, because my comments were at the time were, I like the program, I hate the timing, and I certainly didn't like the price. And I didn't like the timing because I felt like, we're still going through it with COVID. Many businesses are still, suffering, especially restaurants and tourism and hotels and so on. So I thought to myself, geez, $25 to $45 million is just a lot of money to sort of vote on right now. And I did vote to support it, as you know, but I'm getting cold feet, to be honest with you, on the bill and on the program right now, just because there's so much confusion. I was told on a sidebar conversation with one or two senators, not on this committee, I will say, that they felt that this was going to be pretty much supported by federal dollars for many years to come. So really, I don't know what the answer is. I don't pretend to sit here and know how I feel at the end of the day, but I do know that I wish it was clear cut and I wish there was more answers than questions still. And so that's where I'm sort of at as I digest this and think about it. I think it's a good concept still. I think I want to eliminate that stigma of free and reduced lunch, like all of us. I don't want any child to feel any different than any other child because of economics. Everyone deserves a fair chance, but I do know that this bill isn't settling well with me like it did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and that's I think that's true. We're all trying to find our way on this, so thank you for that. Any other questions?
No, but I kind of have to run too. I'm sorry. I booked something.
No, I understand. Everybody needs to. Why don't we wrap today? If Ms. Benham and Mr. Desmarais, if you don't mind just sticking around, unless I see other questions, we'll look forward to seeing everybody Tuesday. This will be back on the agenda, but this is important information and very helpful. I think one of the things that I do need to figure out is the federal piece. I think Senator Terenzini's right. There's a lot of talk out there saying, hey, we're going to get this. The feds are going to pick it up in the long run, but I'm not seeing that reflected in our joint fiscal notes. So I think I just want to be eyes wide open. So
I clarify one thing on that point. On the federal funds. Initially, there was a belief that we could use federal funds to pay for this program through ESSER or otherwise. However, we've learned since then through the AOE that there are other laws that don't allow federal funds to be used for this purpose. However, obviously, we've had universal school meals for a while because of a waiver by the federal government to allow that to happen. That runs out, I think, in September of this year. So when you hear about federal funds being available, I think it's based on a belief that this federal waiver will go on for a couple of years after COVID-19. But the ESSER funding that is available now is not available for this this program.
Okay. Thank you. I think we'll leave it there. And if Jim and Catherine don't mind just sticking around with Jeannie and me, I'd appreciate it. Everyone have a wonderful weekend. Happy Easter, Passover, spring, whatever everyone is celebrating.